Thank you. All right, so now with that, I would love to invite our speaker for today, Pastor Alison. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Nara. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alison. I'm the lead pastor here at the River. It's so good to be here with you this morning. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever because we had that week off, and then I was out sick last Sunday, so I'm really happy. I'm feeling much better. Glad to be back here with all of you, and also a special welcome to those of you who are tuning in via live stream. It's great to have you as well. So this morning, I am excited to be kicking off a new sermon series, which is called Jesus' Parables, Meeting God Through Story. Each week during this series, we're going to take a look at one, perhaps two, of Jesus' parables, and we're going to explore how these engaging, provocative, and often ambiguous stories can help us to meet God in new, life-giving ways. So together, we're going to explore questions like, what exactly is a parable? What new insights might be revealed to us if we take the time to linger with these passages and to wrestle with their invitations? How might these surprising, challenging, and often absurd narratives help us to see ourselves, the world, and the divine more clearly? So let's start with that first question. What exactly is a parable? The literal meaning of the word parable is to throw alongside. So in parable, two things are thrown alongside each other in a brief fictional story in order to make a comparison. And Jesus frequently taught in parables. One reason for this is because this was a genre that was very familiar to his audience. A scholar who's helped me to better understand this context is Amy Jill Levine. Levine is a professor of New Testament and Jewish studies, and she's written a number of books, including one called Short Stories by Jesus, the enigmatic parables of a controversial rabbi, which we have a copy of in our lending library if you would like to check it out. Jesus was Jewish, and so was his audience. And for them, hearing and telling parables was a familiar way to explore truths about God, about life, about the world. Parables, they actually appear throughout the Hebrew Bible in places like Judges and 2 Samuel, and also elsewhere in later rabbinic texts. Additionally, parables would have been told at home in the evening after dinner, or in the workshops and the fields and the synagogues. Stories are part of culture, and parables are a major part of Jewish culture. And because parables were part of the culture, Jesus' audience knew what to expect from them. For example, they knew that parables were more than children's stories or restatements of common knowledge. They knew that parables and the teller of parables were there to prompt them to see the world in a different way, to challenge, and at times to indict. Parables were a very familiar genre to Jesus' audience, but that didn't mean that they were always easy for people to interpret or to apply. Jesus' disciples themselves were often very confused by the stories that Jesus told, and they complained to him, "Why don't you just speak more plainly?" To this point, Jesus explained that he spoke in parables as an attempt to sort of revive people whose hearts had grown dull, to help them, again, see truth in the world around them, to hear it in teachings that were shared with them when they lost the ability to do so. Parables, they can help with this because they require the listener to slow down, to lean in, to wonder, to wrestle. And this is true because in parables, parallels to the real world are not always obvious. Meanings can be ambiguous, and interpretations can be varied. Parables require a deeper level of engagement than teachings in the forms of rules or commands or exhortations. They ask more of us, but they also have more to give us. Levine says this: what makes the parables mysterious or difficult is that they challenge us to look into the hidden aspects of our own values, our own lives. They bring to the surface unasked questions, and they reveal the answers we have always known but refused to acknowledge. Our reaction to them should be one of resistance rather than acceptance. Therefore, if we hear a parable and think, I really like that, or worse, fail to take any challenge, we're not listening well enough. When we seek universal morals from a genre that is designed to surprise, challenge, shake up, or indict, and look for a single meaning in a form that opens to multiple interpretations, we are necessarily limiting the parables and so ourselves. If we stop with the easy lessons, good though they may be, we lose the way Jesus' first followers would have heard the parables, and we lose the genius of Jesus' teaching. We might be better off thinking less about what parables mean and more about what they can do. Remind, provoke, refine, confront, disturb. So with Levine's words in mind, before we dive into today's parable, I want to offer some tips for reading parables in general, tips that can help us to get the most out of these stories. First, it's really helpful if we can try to slow down and keep an open mind. Really, this is a good tip for reading any part of the Bible. All of us come to the Bible with preconceived ideas. This is normal and human. And so it can be helpful to try to intentionally let go of what we think we already know about a passage, especially interpretations that we've heard before. It's helpful to the extent that we're able to try to pretend that we're reading it for the very first time. Slowing down and keeping an open mind allows us to better separate what is actually stated in the text from the various things that we read into it. If we approach a text assuming that we already know what it means, then we can easily miss the invitations that God has for us. When it comes to parables in particular, it's really common for us to rush toward allegorical interpretations. But according to Levine, most often parables are not allegorical, meaning that most parables don't require an external key to explain what its elements mean, in the same way that an allegory does. We run into trouble when we expect a parable to be an allegory with one-to-one correspondence between details of the story and details of the outside world. As Levine says, sometimes a shepherd is just a shepherd and not a cipher for God. As we are slowing down, keeping an open mind, and considering potential interpretations, it's also really important for us to ask ourselves, would this interpretation have made sense to a first century Jewish audience hearing from a first century Jewish teacher? This is something we often forget to consider as Christians living 2,000 years after Jesus. Levine puts it this way: the parables in that first century context need to make sense without any knowledge of how Jesus' followers came to understand him after the Romans crucified him. They need to make sense not only to those who chose to follow him, but to those who found him just a wise teacher, a neighbor in Nazareth, or a fellow Jew. My second tip for how to read parables well is to linger and lean into challenge. Lingering with a parable helps us to avoid the temptation to arrive at a singular meaning, especially a platitude, too quickly. Sitting with the story helps us to make room for ambiguity, to consider multiple interpretations, and to engage with what the story evokes inside of us. It gives us a chance to notice the parts of the story that are surprising or humorous or somewhat absurd. It allows us to identify what about the story we like and feels affirming, and also importantly, what we don't like and what feels challenging, uncomfortable, or disturbing. Lingering gives us the time that we need to consider the perspectives of multiple characters in a story, and the ways that at times we might be like every single one of them. Staying with the story, remaining in its presence, creates room for the Spirit of God to work within us and engage with us personally, whether that be by offering a fresh perspective, gently challenging us in some way, inviting us into something new and life-giving, or filling us with comfort and strength. My final tip is to revisit and re-engage. Something I find beautiful about stories, both inside and outside of the Bible, is how they're able to speak to us in new ways as we engage with them in different contexts and in different points in our lives. This is certainly true with parables. Returning to parables that we've explored before and re-engaging with them allows them to evoke new meanings for us and to offer us new invitations for how to respond. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this has been true for me in my own life. So as some of you know, I did not grow up in the church. Actually, I was raised to be a passionate atheist and to be particularly skeptical of Christianity. Based on what I saw in the world around me, being a Christian meant that you were anti-intellectual, judgmental, hypocritical, and pushy. This was not a group of people that I was interested in joining, ever. Somewhere around the age of 10 or 11, I started experiencing symptoms of depression. And by the time I was 14 or 15, it had really worsened. I now know that depression runs in my family, so some of this was due to genetic factors. But there were also a lot of really heavy things that I was trying to navigate by myself, including trauma and bullying. And during that season of my life, I was in a lot of emotional pain. I felt very alone, and I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not life was worth living. I wanted to believe that things would get better for me, that someday I would be happy, but to be honest, I wasn't really very hopeful that that would happen. And it was in the midst of this very dark place that I was willing to give Christianity a closer look, to try to actually interact with whatever might be out there, a God that I couldn't see and frankly was doubtful existed. And so given my starting point, I'm sure you can imagine my surprise and confusion when I started to have experiences of God that were actually making my life better. During my sophomore year of high school, there were a few close friends that I spent a lot of time talking with about the struggles in my life. And honestly, I am not sure where I'd be today without their support. And during one of those conversations, one of my friends spoke to me about her faith. She shared with me about the ways that her relationship with God helped her to get through the hard times in her own life. And she told me about one of Jesus's parables that goes like this. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. My friend, she talked to me about how, from her perspective, part of what made my experience of life so hard was that it was like a house built on sand. From her perspective, what I was lacking was a firm foundation. I couldn't have articulated this at the time, but what I think I was really yearning for as a teenager was a life with fewer storms. Metaphorically speaking, I wanted the rain to stop falling and chilling me to the bone. I wanted the floods to stop sweeping in and trying to drown me. I wanted the winds to stop blowing so hard and beating me up all the time. And truthfully, this is often what I still long for today, for the experience of life to not hurt so much. Then and now, a life with fewer storms didn't seem to be an option on the table. And since that was the case, I decided that a stronger foundation sounded pretty good to me. So I decided to give faith a try. I began reading the Bible and experimenting with prayer. And during those first prayer times, I began to feel this warm, tingling sensation in my hands. I could sense a loving presence all around me. I started to experience joy for the first time in years. And I began to believe that there was something better ahead for me. Looking back, one of the things that I find interesting is that my friend understood this parable as being about faith in Christianity. So for her, Christians, meaning those who prayed the sinner's prayer and invited Jesus into their hearts and were born again, they were the ones who were like the wise man. Christians were the ones with the firm foundation, and everyone else was foolishly building their lives on sinking sand. For many years, I thought that this was the correct interpretation of this parable. But these days, I think about it quite differently. To start, the Christian religion was not formed until many years after Jesus had died. Like Jesus himself, Jesus' first followers were Jewish, and they understood following Jesus to be a form of practicing Judaism. Eventually, Christianity became a separate religion from Judaism, but it didn't start that way. So Jesus was not speaking about choosing to be a Christian or not, no matter how you define Christianity, because that category just didn't exist yet. Nor was Jesus speaking generally about believing in God or identifying with a religious tradition. Jesus' audience was mostly fellow Jews, so those things were a given. So what then was Jesus talking about? Let's go back and take a look at the text. Jesus said, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock." So according to Jesus, this first type of person, one who is like the wise man, is a person who hears these words of mine and acts on them. In contrast, the second type of person, one who is like the foolish man, is a person who hears these words and does not act on them. This parable, which you may have heard called the parable of hearers and doers, or the parable and the wise and foolish builders, or the parable of the two foundations, it comes at the end of Jesus' most famous recorded sermon. The version of this sermon found in the book of Matthew is often referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, while the Luke version is called the Sermon on the Plain. Regardless of location, a mountain or a plain, in both gospel accounts, the sermon includes many of Jesus' most famous teachings, and it ends with today's parable. It was as if Jesus ended his sermon by saying something like, "I have shared much wisdom with you today. What you do with it is up to you. Will you act upon what you've heard, or won't you? The choice is yours." It seems to me that this parable is less about what labels we embrace or what beliefs we hold, and more about our ability to respond to the wisdom that we receive. When we encounter thought-provoking ideas and practices that resonate with us, whether they be in a sermon, a book, an article, a podcast, a YouTube video, an Instagram reel, a conversation with a wise friend or a therapist, and so on, how able are we to take what we've heard and apply it to our lives? Does it come in one ear and go out the other? Or does it stick with us, shaping us and spurring us to take action? When it comes to Jesus' teachings, how able are we not just to understand and agree with what Jesus taught, but to also do the things that he said to do? At this point, many sermons would veer into things like guilt or shame or condemnation around not taking faith seriously enough. Please rest assured that's not what we do here at the river, and we're not going to do that today. And what's really interesting to me is that in this story, Jesus did not say that those who fail to act upon what they hear are bad people, or that they're lazy, or that they don't love God, or that God is disappointed in them, or that they're going to be punished in the afterlife. Instead, Jesus appealed to his audience's self-interest regarding their experiences of life on earth. He said that those who hear and do are like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. To me, this sounds a lot like Jesus saying that following his teachings, especially those laid out in the Sermon on the Mount, can help us to develop the inner strength that we need to better weather life's storms. The storms will still come. That's just the nature of life. But putting Jesus' words into action can help us to feel more grounded and resilient. So returning to my own story for a moment, I think it's important for me to note that as powerful and impactful as my first experiences of God were, becoming a Christian, beginning to follow Jesus, did not mean that I was miraculously healed of my depression. In fact, depression is something that I still live with and have to manage on an ongoing basis. Depression is still part of my life, but it no longer rules my life. In addition to my connection with God, things like therapy, medication, supportive relationships, this faith community, fresh air, all of these things are resources that I draw upon to manage it. And also, over the years, I've experienced tremendous emotional healing. These days, my life is radically different than when I was a teenager. I'm happy to say that my life is filled with so much more joy and peace and meaning and fun and adventure. I have an amazing husband, a job that I really enjoy and that gives me purpose, many people that love and care about me. My life is full and beautiful and good. That isn't to say, however, that my life is free from challenges or pain or difficult seasons. There are relationships in my life that haven't turned out like I hoped that they would. There are medical struggles that I have to continue to navigate on a daily basis. There are loved ones who I've lost too soon and continue to grieve every single day. And there's cherished dreams that I had from my life that continue to remain out of reach and beyond my control. Life can still be very hard at times, not to mention everything happening in the world. But unlike in the past, I know that I'm never alone. I have faith that God's resurrection power is always at work in me and in the world around me, which gives me hope. I have seen that beauty can emerge out of ashes, joy out of mourning, and life out of death. And I have developed a sense of inner strength that I never thought was possible. These things didn't happen overnight, and they didn't happen without my participation. Instead, they developed slowly as I lived out my faith one day at a time. As I learned how to love myself and others more deeply, as I practiced connecting with and experiencing God in ways that brought newfound healing and growth and resilience, as I put new insights into practice, developed new habits, and was intentional about the direction I was trying to go. This is not to say that I'm perfect or have everything figured out. I assure you, I definitely do not. However, the Alison of today is quite different from the Alison of 20 years ago. These days, I feel much freer to be my authentic self. I've developed greater confidence in my own worth and capabilities. I found a deep sense of peace in knowing that I'm living out my values and pursuing my dreams as best I can. And I've experienced profound comfort in being able to more fully believe that God is always with me and working for my good. All of this happened slowly, often much slower than I would have liked, in partnership with God. Together with God, I created a life of flourishing, not a perfect life, not a life without suffering, but a life where there's more than pain and darkness and despair, where there's also so much beauty and goodness and light. I still hope for and am committed to working toward a world with fewer storms, a world that's gentler and more just, where not so much strength and resilience are required just to survive, where all people are treated with dignity and respect and have what they need to flourish. But until then, I pray that God would strengthen each of us from the inside out and would sustain us through our times of trial. I don't have time to fully explore this with you today, but I want to mention that while I was working on this sermon, I spent a lot of time looking at the work of psychologist Dr. Rick Hanson. Much of Hanson's work is focused on how, in his words, we can use the power of positive neuroplasticity to change our brain and grow inner strength so we can be happier, more confident, and more calm, no matter what life throws our way. Hanson says that inner strength, which he defines as the reservoir of psychological and emotional resources within us that allows us to face life's challenges with resilience, grace, and determination, is not purely innate. Instead, inner strength is actually something we can cultivate by taking steps to change our brains. Through his research, Hanson has identified 12 aspects or qualities that contribute to inner strength. And as I considered these qualities, I found myself curious to see how much they connected with Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. And I discovered that they correlate quite well. As a bit of a thought exercise, I went ahead and connected sections of the Sermon on the Mount to each of the 12 qualities, specific teachings from Jesus that can help us to cultivate the different aspects of inner strength. If this sounds intriguing to you, you'll want to take a look at the Resource of the Week post I'm working on for this week. It'll go out in Friday's email, and I'll have a lot of information about the research and the connections that I made. So if you're not already on our email list, please fill out a connection card so that you can be added and you can get the link to this. And also, you can always find our Resource of the Week posts on our website. all you need to do is go to the resources section and scroll down in the drop-down menu to resource of the week. All right, this is the moment when I need some help from the host team. Yes. So because, as I spoke about earlier, we believe that parables invite us to linger, when planning this series, we felt that it would be appropriate to end each sermon with some time for reflection or processing, to linger just a bit before moving into musical worship. Each week, this will look a little bit different. Today, we're going to pass out some handouts and pens. The first page, it has 3 different versions of today's parable taken from different Bible translations. Sometimes hearing something said in a slightly different way can open up new possibilities for us. And the back of the page includes some questions for reflection. And for those of you who are tuning in via live stream, the translations and the questions will also appear on the screen. So let's take a few minutes to linger, and then I'll come back on the stage and bring us back together. Feel free to use this time however feels most helpful to you, whether that's reading, writing, praying, or just sitting in silence. All right, I'll come back in a few minutes. All right. Thank you, everyone. At this point, I'd like to invite the worship team back up to the stage. And I also will close us in prayer. This prayer comes from John D. Rayner. When evil darkens our world, give us light. When despair numbs our souls, give us hope. When we stumble and fall, lift us up. When doubts assail us, give us faith. When nothing seems sure, give us trust. When ideals fade, give us vision. When we lose our way, be our guide, that we may find serenity in your presence and purpose in doing your will. Amen. Before I leave the stage, I want to just mention a couple of quick things about the census that Nara mentioned earlier. So I would so appreciate it if you would make a plan for filling this out and returning it before the end of the month. This is really important because what we hear back from you, this is going to help us to shape our budget and priorities for the year ahead. And we really want your voices to influence that process. So please take some time to fill it out. We have these printed copies here at the church if you prefer filling things out by hand. And then we also have a digital version of the form that you can find on the homepage of our website. Just because I know some folks, it helps to have some time set aside. That's why we're doing these census parties today. And in 2 weeks, we're going to just put out some tables in the center section, or if you want to find like a quiet corner, you're welcome to just kind of spread out anywhere in the church, except for the elementary room, because our high school boys and mentors will be meeting in there. But anywhere else, you're welcome to go. And I will just be kind of roaming around. I don't want you to feel like I'm like hovering over you or watching you, but I do want to be here as a resource in case you have any questions about anything that comes up. So please don't hesitate to grab me if that's the case. All right, thank you.